Special Operations, Covert Ops, Espionage, The Team House, with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
One thing I did want to touch upon was in your book you mentioned that our deployments to these areas become like a self-licking ice cream cone or a self-fulfilling prophecy, that it's like we go out there and we smoke up some of the militiamen, some of the bad guys up in the mountains. Of course, you know, Afghan sense of honor demands they come and tag us back for that. You know, that can't go unanswered. And it just goes kind of back and forth without any like forward progress being made.
It does. And very often there are underlying factors causing this that the U.S. guys aren't aware of. And the reason they're not aware of it is because often the people giving them the intelligence are concealing from them the true reality of what's going on. Right. U.S. forces entered Kunar and they got in bed pretty quick with the people who were willing to give them information and the people who were willing to supply them with armed forces of militiamen. So there's kind of a group of existing strongmen in the province who both the CIA and Special Operations Forces allied with for very understandable practical reasons. I mean, these were the guys who wanted to help and who had men with guns and who in fact had kind of existing intelligence networks. And they would provide good intelligence. I mean, they would send you out on, they'd say, oh, there's going to be an arms cache here, or oh, this guy who did the rocket attack the other day is here, and it would work. But mixed in with that, they also would use these American forces for their own ends. Because what was happening at the time is there was kind of a resource grab going on. There was a mad rush going on in Kunar province, as there was in every other province in the country, to kind of divide up the spoils as the new post-2001 order formed. So in Kunar, the things that are kind of up for grabs are government jobs, sort of senior government positions, which carry with them the ability to extort bribes and money and get money out of people. And then natural resources, which in Kunar takes the form of conifer forests, which have this very lucrative cedar way up in the mountains that wealthy people in the Gulf like to use for cabinets and different things like that, which is huge, which is big business. And then gems way out in the western part of the Pech Valley. And so timber becomes a real flashpoint. In that this is one of the things that the U.S. gets sucked into without knowing that it's getting sucked into it. Mm-hmm. And there's an event that happens back in the summer of 2003, actually. So before either of these Green Beret teams were actually living out in the Pech at Fob Blessing, and before the big Ranger surge up into the mountains. But a few months before that, when Jim Gant and his team were living out of Fob Asadabad and just kind of roaming around the province, going up into the Pech, looking for gunfights, looking for stuff to do. Because I think it's important to note that, like, if you have experience of the war in Afghanistan that's from 2010 or 2014, or it can be hard to understand how long of a leash these units had. They had no leash at all, in fact. I mean, generally when Jim and his team or other teams like them wanted to go out and do something and go somewhere really far away, I mean, they would tell the AOB guy at the base, like, here's the 5 W's of where we're going, send it up. We'll be back when we're back. There was none of this, kind of run it up the flagpole for approval from the general in Bagram. So these teams were just kind of left to find jobs for themselves, to make themselves useful, keep themselves busy. Right. And one of the ways that Jim's team got itself busy was kind of part of the origin story of the whole mess in the Korangal is in the summer of 2003, there's a little kerfuffle that happens in the Korangal where a member of the new government border guards goes into the Korangal and gets roughed up by the Korangalis. And he comes back and his commander, a guy named Haji John God, who's the big border guard commander, complains to the Green Berets and CIA guys at Fob Asadabad, hey, these Korangalis, they roughed up, a government representative who was out there to collect taxes. And so Jim and his team, and actually the AOB commander as well, get sent out to the Korangal to go sort this out. Now, that's the version of the backstory that was presented to them by this guy and by Haji Jahan Dad, but it's not the real version of the backstory. I mean, essentially what really was happening was Haji Jahan Dad was a timber baron, not in the sense that he was harvesting timber, but in the sense that he controlled the exit points from the Korangal Valley for the Korangalis to get their timber to Pakistan. So the Korangalis would sell their cedar first to him, and he in turn would get it across into Pakistan and sell it to this Pakistani timber mafia, who would then, arrange for it to be distributed internationally. But so Haji John Dodd, he, in this kind of mad rush in the first couple of years, he gets himself named Border Guards Commander. But he does not, in fact, have any authority to collect taxes or anything like that. So that's not what happened. There was not, a tax collector who got roughed up by the Korangalis. What happened was a representative of Haji John Dodd went over to the Korangalis to change the terms of their business agreement to be more favorable to him and less favorable to them, because now he has the Americans on his side and he has the sort of the imprimatur of being a government official on his side. And the Korangalis object and they beat the guy up. And so Haji John Dodd, tells the Americans, he presents it in the way that he presents it, and Jim Gant's team winds up in the Korangal. And there's actually audio from a young Afghan American who was on as kind of a spare interpreter on this mission. He was the son of the governor, and he recorded this whole thing, and it's you can listen to it. You can hear the AOB commander giving this very off-key analogy, describing what's happening. Basically, he tells the Korangalis who are gathered there, he says, like, hey, look, guys, you got to pay your taxes. Like, when I get a speeding ticket, I pay the ticket. Like, that's how civilization works, got to play by the rules. And then, before they leave, they make the lead Korangali elder pose for a photo shaking hands with the guy who they'd roughed up a few days earlier. And they kind of go back to base and check the box and say, dealt with that one, smoothed over the dispute, explained to them that they got to play by the rules. And of course, what's really happened is, in the eyes of the Korangalis, the Americans have just come in as muscle on the other side.
Right.
And so it's not too long after that the Korangalis, who they had some affiliations with the Taliban before 2001. Most people in Kunar didn't. Kunar was not a Taliban stronghold before 2001. It was much more. It's a Salafi place. Salafis and the Taliban aren't kind of natural religious kind of. They don't go together very easily, and there actually have been a lot of the strongmen in Kunar have been allied with the Northern Alliance. But the Taliban were the Korangalis were one of the few groups in the province that had some ties with the Taliban. And so what they do when this happens is they call up the Taliban and they say, we're going to need you guys' help. We've got a problem. And so just as Haji John Dodd brought in these American special operators for muscle, the Korangalis bring in the Taliban for muscle. And this is kind of the self-licking ice cream cone, is that this is the dynamic that kind of, the third group team a year later doesn't really understand that this is the dynamic that they're interfering in. And so they start going in there, and it just becomes more and more clear to the Korangalis that the Americans are a threat to their to their very lucrative business interests. Yeah. And so the Taliban presence grows. Now there's more Taliban, more targets, more SIGINT coming out of the valley. Because the Taliban is there, there's a particular Arab al-Qaeda figure named Abu Ikhlas who starts going there to provide training to them and everything. That, of course, generates more interest on the American side. Oh, there's an al-Qaeda guy up there. And before you know it, the Korangal is like this heart of darkness that there are serious operations go into.
I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong. I'd like to hear what you think, Wes, but I think that in the common analysis, we often think of people in third world countries, or even not third world countries. We tend to think of these folks as either savages. We have a sort of that sort of like racist view that these are primitive people, that they're idiots, or we have this view that they are these sort of hapless victims of Western colonialism. That everything was great until we came in, we see it in Syria, we've seen it in Iraq, you're talking about Afghanistan, other parts of Central Asia. We've seen that these local people, these so-called savages or these so-called victims, are in all actuality very clever, self-interested players actively involved in their own destiny. And they're very smart about how they're able to play the United States in their favor.
Absolutely. I mean, as one Afghan friend, a Kunari friend of mine, put it this way, he basically said, you think that Malik Zareen and those guys were the CIA's proxies? The CIA were Malik Zareen's proxies. And I think both are true. I mean, they were using one another for their own ends. I think the difference might be the degree to which they're aware that they're being used. And I think some American special operators and intelligence collectors who were up there were very keenly aware of the ways in which they might be used and very alert to it, and many others were not.